Hi guys, welcome to yet another episode of our weekly podcast at the end of the day. And for those who are new to this episode or to this show, this is a weekly guide for new immigrants arriving in the US. And in today's show, we will be talking about making an academic career in the US. And in order to do that, I have Anuz with me as always. Myself is Dipika, and then we have Larry Tung. Welcome to the show, Larry.
Yes, well, welcome to your college. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I do here. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Performing and Fine Arts. This is my fourth year at York.
Right.
But previously I've taught at King University in New Jersey for 11 years.
So you have been in the US for 18 years, right?
Time flies.
Yes. You were doing journalism back home in Taiwan. You came here and you did your Master of Fine Arts in the US. And then you also did a Master's in Journalism in the US. And how did you actually get into this teaching field?
It kind of happened by accident. Although I would say that I started teaching when I was very young. I remember when I was 19 years old, first year of college, I taught English to children in Taiwan. And so actually throughout my college career, I've always worked as an ESL teacher. After the military service, which is mandatory in Taiwan, I became a reporter, also kind of by accident because I wasn't interested in journalism, but I got a job at an English language newspaper in Taiwan because I speak English. So that's sort of how I started my career in journalism. When I came to the US, I did my Master of Fine Arts in television production, thinking that I would pursue a full-time career in journalism here, but things didn't happen as I expected. Because here in the US, most media companies, when you're first starting out, it's all very freelance-based.
Right.
So I was a freelance production assistant for 1010 Winds, a radio station here for a year. And then my practical training expired, and I needed a work visa.
Okay.
But the radio station wasn't able to give me that. So at the same time, I was working part-time as an ESL teacher in Flushing at a 2-year college. And they were able to give me an H-1B. So that's how I kind of went into teaching, sort of really, unexpectedly. But during this whole time, I was still producing work and doing journalism. So in 2004, also very lucky, I was able to get a full-time tenure-track faculty position at King University.
Yeah, for those who are new, how do you define, what do you mean when you say tenure-track faculty position?
In the university in the US, many colleges use a lot of part-time faculty. So it's difficult to get a tenure-track position. So it depends on the college. So at CUNY, the tenure process is 7 years. So if you get a tenure-track position and you get through 7 years of review, then basically you have this job for life.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so people say, oh, you get tenure. That means it's after years of review. When I was doing my MFA at Brooklyn College, my professors told me that the MFA is a terminal degree in the field of television production. So that make us qualified to teach at the college level.
Okay, so what do you mean by terminal degree for the audience?
So the terminal degree is a highest academic degree in that particular field. So I would say 95% of the time, the terminal degree is a doctorate. So for example, if you want to teach English literature or if you want to teach history, in order to get a tenure-track position, there's the difference between a private college and a public college. Usually at a public institution, they would require a terminal degree, but at a private institution, that just depends on, your other qualification maybe.
Right. And Larry, there might be so many newly arriving immigrants who might have a master's degree in their country and they want to pursue academic career like you here. Is it mandatory for those people to have another, master's degree or PhD degree in America?
I don't think it's mandatory, but I certainly think it makes you much more attractive if you do. Because I think, just based on my experience, I feel like a lot of Americans feel like these foreign credentials are somehow a little bit less than American degrees.
Okay.
So if you do have an American degree, I think it's helpful,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think it's necessary. Maybe it's helpful if you participate in some conferences
Mm-hmm.
in the U.S.
How do you sell those credentials to apply for a job?
For teaching positions,
Mhm.
I think it's getting more competitive these days
Okay.
because there are more graduate programs. So there are many people walking around with fancy graduate degrees, for that matter. So I think one way to enter the field is maybe by adjunct teaching, which means part-time teaching.
Okay.
So there are various websites that you can go to for higher education positions, like higheredjobs.com or chronicle.com. These are sort of website in the field of higher education that you can go to, and they have advertisement for full-time and part-time positions. So one way to enter the field is to teach a class somewhere, and especially if you're not from here, maybe that helps you learn about what it's like to teach American students.
Right.
Yeah, and at the same time you build relationship with that institution, and you meet people, other professors maybe, or other adjuncts, and so you can network that way.
If you could remember some of the major highlights from your personal experience, some culture shocks or some new insights that you gained as you began teaching here in the USA.
When I was a student here, it was fine. But when I started teaching, really working with particularly the undergraduate population in the US, that was the biggest culture shock because it's very, very different. Where I'm from, education is everything. Teachers are God. Here, they have very different approach, I think. And also, my own undergraduate education, in Taiwan, was very competitive, and you have to do a lot of homework,
Right.
Study a lot. Here, it's very different. Depending on the institution that you work with, an Ivy League institution can be very different from a community college. But I think in general, students are less motivated, I would say. So it takes some effort to motivate them, and that was the biggest culture shock. But the best advice I ever got about teaching was from a dean when I was teaching at Kane. And she was very blunt, very straightforward with me because she saw my teaching evaluation in the first semester, which was not very good. And so she wanted to have a talk with me, and she said, and I was kind of not complaining, but I was talking about how the students are bad and so far and so forth. And she was like, first of all, you're not teaching at Princeton. You have to make your teaching work for your student.
Right.
This is the population that you're working with, and you have to find a way to make it work for them. So I think I would say I've been teaching for the last 14 years, and I still struggle with it,
Right.
because every class is different.
Talking about struggle, how do we deal about our accent?
I didn't really have a lot of issues communicating with my students, but I've seen colleagues who have struggled with communicating with students. So I always say this to anyone whose native language is not English. I always tell them, you shouldn't feel embarrassed by it because you speak multiple languages.
Right.
If it is an issue, then take a class. Take an accent reduction class. Work with someone who can help you to reduce your accent. There's nothing to be embarrassed about because you are making an effort to address your issue. So I always say people shouldn't feel embarrassed by it, but it's important to acknowledge that it is an issue, and you have to deal with it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think over time you will improve. If you work with someone at the same time, listen to the radio, watch television, and just pay attention to pronunciation.
Right.
Yeah, really the most important thing is you don't necessarily have to have an American accent. I don't think that's the most important thing. I think the important thing is to be clear. To be clear.
Okay.
Right.
So any final note for those people who want to get into teaching academic career in the US and who are very new to the US?
I feel like a lot of international people, because of the culture that we came from, we tend to be a little bit too modest. I would say be confident and take credits when credits are due.
Some people who want to reach out to you for some academic advice, are you willing to share your email address with them?
LTUNG at york.cuny.edu.
So if you want to reach out to Larry, make sure you mention at the end of the day in the subject matter so that he understands where these emails are coming from.
Thank you so much, Larry, for inviting us to your college and
Thank
giving
you
us
for
your
having
time.
me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Larry.
Thank you.
Okay, time to go. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Hey guys, a quick note. If you have a personal story that you think might be helpful to the newly arriving immigrants in the US, please contact us. We would love to feature you in our podcast. Go to our website, podcastattheendoftheday.com, and write to us by going to the feedback section.
And by the way, if you love this podcast, you can support us with a small donation. Your help will enable us to continue producing more episodes. The link to support our podcast is in the description below.